Welcome to the Whitetail Obsession Podcast with Dave Richmond and co-host Chris Worthing, where we talk and teach everything deer and turkey hunting related. Follow along as we help teach you tips and techniques about hunting, food plots, and habitat management strategies that everyone can use.
Welcome back to podcast 132. Riding solo today. No Chris. Welcome back, guys. I hope you guys are doing great. And today's episode, I want to get into moving into 2026. Happy New Year, by the way. And 2026 and years beyond that, I want you guys to have an open mind. It's so important to have an open mind to new ideas and to broaden your thinking when it comes to deer habitat. So next week starts my consulting for the year. I will be consulting through January, February, March, April, and a little bit in May. Then I got a little project in July that I jump into. But with that said, I'll be in Maryland. I'll be tons of Pennsylvania, tons of Virginia this year, West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana. Those are the states I'll be working in this year. Most of my consulting, I would say, is primarily within Virginia, Maryland, and PA, but it also ventures into Delaware and New York and out the Midwest on occasion. So, but when I'm working on these properties, okay, I have a very open mind. And a lot of times when I get to a client's property, he already has something in his mind. And it could be, okay, I watched somebody on YouTube and they told me I need to hinge cut. Or I watched this other guy and he says I need to do this on my property. Or I need to do this, or I got to hang 50 rope scrapes, or this and that. Well, just because somebody on the internet says to do something doesn't mean that applies to your property. And I see this over and over and over again. It's endless the amount of times that I see this. The problem with it is, yeah, hinge cut is good, select cut is good, clear cutting is good, scrapes are good, water holes are good. They're all good, but does it apply and does it make sense on your property? And for example, I get into some clients, and I went to one guy and he had like, I don't know, 50 to 100 rope scrapes everywhere, and they weren't doing anything. And it's because he saw it online because somebody used one and shot a deer and they thought it was a good idea on their property. Or I go to another property and they hinge cut the entire woods and they're not having any luck, and they're like, well, this guy said to do it. Well, yeah, but it doesn't work everywhere. It's not needed everywhere. So you have to have an open mind. All of these different practices are tools to use. Does that tool apply to your property? Not all the time. So when I go into it, I'm looking at, okay, where can I put food plots that's easy access to get to hunting wise? Where can I put bedding? Okay, that makes sense for the bedding to go. And I want to get those deer to bed in that bedding area for longer periods of time. When they get out of that bed, I want them to work through my woods to the food plots. Have transition areas in between to set the hunter up to ambush them before they get to the food, or then when they come out of the food, back to the bedding. Depending on the size of the property, bedding, you may not want to bed the deer there, technically. Because if the property is too small and you start placing bedding areas in there, then you're left with no room to maneuver around your property. Then you're left with no transition areas because food offsets bedding, right? So if you have food up against the neighbor's property and then you have no bedding, the deer are going to be bedding on the neighbors, which allows them, they're susceptible to hunting, it's getting shot because they're bedding on the neighbors. So everything has to flow and work together. And having an open mind with that is so critical when you're trying to design your property. The number one tool that most properties need is a timber harvest. Most landowners, they're afraid to cut the timber. I shouldn't say they're afraid to cut it. They themselves, they're just afraid to have it cut because, oh, the trees are so pretty, or I just like the trees and all this other stuff. Well, your hunting property will never be an A plus unless unless you cut timber if it's needed. It'll never be an A plus. You can put food plots, you can put water holes, you can put mock scrapes, you can do all this stuff. But if you don't have the daytime browse, you don't have the ground structure, the logs on the ground, the cover, etc., you're not going to hold the deer for longer periods of time during the daylight hours. You have to have browse. Browse is the backbone to all healthy deer herds. Without it, you have nothing. Most people, I would say on average, hunters are planting, I'd say a quarter. I wouldn't even say that. I would say an eighth to maybe 1 acre size food plots, I would say is probably the average. Those size plots can't produce enough food to sustain a deer herd. It's impossible. It can't happen. So you have to start with the browse. Look, you have to look at the timber. Look up. Do I have sunlight coming through, hitting the floor, hitting the ground to allow regeneration of whatever it is, grasses, weeds, briars, shrubs, whatever it is. If you don't have that on your property, you're limiting yourself on the amount of success you can have. Yes, food plots are a great attraction. Yes, water holes are a great attraction. Mock scrapes, they're okay. So there's levels of attractions on your property and they all have to work together. So when I go into these properties, and what you guys should do too, is just have an open mind. Just because somebody says you have to hinge cut on your property doesn't mean that it applies to your property. You have clear cuts, you have select cuts, you have some, different like little TSI projects you could do, hinge cutting, all these tools are acceptable and work, but does it make sense? Okay. And remember, food plots are great. That's like the number one thing that people do on the property. And it's a good starting point because you can work on your timber because harvesting the timber isn't like instant, success. And it's not instant gratification because, if you select cut the timber, yeah, you can put the logs on the ground, have a little bit more ground structure, but to allow that regeneration of the briars and weeds and grasses and shrubs and that stuff's going to take 1 to 3 years to really explode. A food plot, 2 months you can have an amazing food plot and you can have attraction. So there's levels when it comes to designing the property. So what I'm looking at again is, I'm touring the whole place and I try to steer the client in the direction of having an open mind because me or whoever comes in, we're going to redesign your entire property. We're going to look where stands can go that's easy to access. We're not blowing the woods out, right? So there could be stands on your property, locations that are great, but if you can't get to them without spooking the entire woods out, it's a horrible location. So you have to look at it as let's pick a stand or let's build this food plot and then hunt, find an area to hunt and then build around that. We can attract them to certain areas. We can We can use the hinge cutting to steer deer a certain way, or we can clear cut an area, or select cut an area, or have it select cut by a forester, or uh, clear cut, whether it's 50, 60, 70%, open canopy that's cut to allow that sunlight in. And then we can come back in and maybe do hinge cutting or select a little bit more of a select cut and make those strategic, bedding areas. But I get guys that call me all the time and they have so many things that's stuck in their mind. And if you just sit back and listen and at the end of their story, you let people explain their story. At the end of the story, it's not working, right? Because that's why they're looking for advice and they're looking for extra help is because it's not working. And then sometimes, they get it in their mind though that they won't even admit that it's not working because I did what this guy said, I hinge cut all my trees, blah 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 blah. But you you can't go about it that way because with deer hunting, nothing's guaranteed, right? It's a wild, free ranging deer. They're going to do what they want to do. You can't really control what your neighbors do. You can control what you do, but you can't really control what the neighbors do. If your neighbors around your property are, busting the deer out, riding four wheelers, pushing the deer all over the place, it gets tricky. There's isolated pieces of property out there that's going to have better success than yours. It's just the way that it goes. And I always say this, and a lot of people won't tell you this because, they're looking to make money off of you, is that all this stuff, all this, habitat improvements and land management, it's property dependent. It's property dependent. You can have, you can set your property up the best in the world. But if your neighbors are jacking it up, they're busting, shooting everything they see and walking all over the place and your property is small and it has a ripple effect through the entire area. Yes, you can do food plots and have the attraction and bring more deer in. But to truly see the full potential, it's like everybody within that area has to kind of work together. And when do you have that? Hardly ever. So that's why I always say it's property dependent. Find a place, that has access on maybe two or three sides or doesn't have bordering hunting pressure. We can go down that whole road, but the whole idea of this is to go into things with an open mind. Look at it as, okay, I have these tools. I have the the tool of clear cutting or select cut or hinge cutting or certain food plots or you know um, how do you plant that food plot? Do you disc the ground? Do you do a no-till setup? Do you do this and do you do that? And as everybody knows, my method is discing the ground, right? But I also have to have that open mindset when it comes to meeting the clients because I can recommend a certain thing, but if they want to do it a certain way, then I have to tailor the objective kind of to their needs. If they're dead set on no-till, okay, well, we can set you up with a no-till. I don't recommend that, but I can help you out with it. I recommend discing the ground, you know, but if guys want to have it stuck in their mind that they want to put rope scrapes out. I'm not really for rope scrapes, but I can kind of recommend them and guide them in the right direction to have better results. I tour properties all the time, right? And I'll go through the property on a buggy, and the clients, yeah, we got this set up. We got this giant, tower stand out in the middle of the food plot, and all these rope scrapes, or this beautiful food plot that's surrounding my 15-foot, tower stand. Yeah, how many deer you cut out of it? You seen anything? No, haven't seen nothing. Okay, well that tower stand probably needs to be moved, off the food plot over this way. These rope scrapes need to be taken out. You got to stop riding your four wheeler through the plot. Really? Nah, I'm just going to keep it there. So I see this type of thing all the time because you know moving that box blind out of the middle of the field Well, I seen a guy on TV, they have their blind in the middle of the field and they shoot deer all the time. Well, yeah, it's property dependent. That farm's not getting hunting pressure. Can it happen? Sure, can definitely. Majority of the areas are highly pressured deer hunting areas, highly pressured. They see a box blind in the middle of the field. Yeah, those small bucks might come out in there. And if they do come out, they're 200 yards away from the blind. 20 minutes before dark. Then the big boy, he's in there in the dark, in the pitch black, and he doesn't even get near it. Yeah, obviously there's exceptions to all that, but I'm speaking in general terms. So you have to be open-minded. And I believe that if you are open-minded, you can have way better results, like way better. You can take a property that's like like a D rated, a great, give it a D or a C, and having an open mind, you can bring it to a B. And then, and if it's all set up properly, you can bring it to an A. So, but some people, even myself, I get, with certain things, you get stubborn with things and you don't want to change. But change is a great thing. It's a great thing, especially when it comes to deer hunting. There's certain ways to do things. Yes, there's 50 different ways to plant a food plot. There's 50 different ways to cut timber. And all those ways are probably great ways to do it, but does it apply to your situation? That's what you have to think of when you're going into this, because we're early January now, and now is the time. Hunting seasons are coming to an end here. Maryland goes till the 31st of July, or sorry, not July, January. There's other states where season's wrapping up, and now's the time to start thinking about doing improvements. Mapping things out, and okay, well, this worked, this didn't work this year. Let's try to change it up. Let's make a goal of, okay, we're in this year 2026, we're going to stay off the property 50% more, or we're going to plant this food plot and we're going to make it 25% bigger or 10% bigger, or we're going to use different access routes this year, and small tweaks. Those are the things you keep learning, you keep changing things, and then eventually things start working, things start clicking. And having that open mindset is, I'm telling you, it's really key to all of this. Stop watching YouTube videos and thinking, if you're watching a video about hinge cutting and the guy says, yeah, I hinge cut all my properties and this and that and the other, don't take that as you have to do it on your property. Just keep it in the back of your mind. And if you need help, talk to somebody. If it applies to your property, talk to somebody, have somebody come out, ask questions, watch other YouTube videos. Don't just stick to one person. Everybody has their favorite YouTuber, and that's fine, but you have to have an open mind. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast 132, and moving into this year 2026, have an open mind, and I promise you your deer hunting will be way better. I'll see you guys on 133. Happy New Year.